Ladies and gentlemen, most people rarely say this out loud. The greatest challenge to a narcissist is the person they underestimated, the super empath. An empath is someone who feels everything deeply. They sense the energy in a room, the tension in the air, and even the dishonesty in words. For a long time, they often stay quiet, believing it is their role to repair, to maintain peace, to absorb the chaos like a sponge. Yet what is not often mentioned is this: the super empath is not weak, only patient. They observe, they learn, and they connect the pieces. When the truth about the narcissist becomes clear, the dynamic shifts entirely. Once the empath fully understands, they stop reacting, stop over-explaining, and no longer seek closure from someone incapable of offering it. The way a super empath unsettles a narcissist is simple. They stop playing the game. They withdraw. They remain silent. And in that silence, the narcissist loses control. Narcissists depend on control. They thrive on confusion, on emotional reactions, and on remaining the center of attention, even through conflict. So when the empath no longer responds, when they set boundaries and follow through, the narcissist is left without direction. They become irrelevant, unseen, and powerless. Healing itself becomes the greatest form of resistance, because healing says, I recognize what happened, and I am not broken. It declares, I see the attempts to control, and I am free. I see the dishonesty, and I choose truth. Nothing affects a narcissist more than watching the person they sought to diminish rise stronger, independent, and unshaken. Empaths feel everything: subtle energy shifts, unspoken words, and hidden emotions. They sense sadness behind laughter or fear behind anger. They don't just notice emotions, they absorb them. This sensitivity is both their strength and their vulnerability. Narcissists are the opposite. They do not tune into others' feelings, boundaries, or needs, but this does not mean they lack awareness. Instead, they are strategic. While empaths naturally connect, narcissists analyze. They study people, learn what triggers a response, and identify which buttons to press. Above all, they desire control over perception, over emotions, and over others. This is why the relationship between an empath and a narcissist so often turns harmful. The empath, with their natural sensitivity, frequently tries to comfort, repair, or make sense of the narcissist's behavior. Many empaths assume the narcissist is simply misunderstood. They believe that by giving more love, patience, or understanding, they can reach the real person behind the mask. But the truth is, the narcissist has no interest in healing. They seek compliance. They thrive on attention, conflict, and control. They exploit the empath's kindness, reframing it as weakness. Over time, the empath begins to doubt themselves. They start to believe they are too emotional, too sensitive, too much. That self-doubt is exactly what the narcissist aims for, because confusion makes control easy. Their environment is built on contradiction, manipulation, and chaos. One moment, they offer praise. The next, they demean. They might call someone the best thing that ever happened to them, only to treat them like a burden soon after. Meanwhile, the empath feels every contradiction: the affection, the hurt, the guilt, the hope. It becomes emotional whiplash. The narcissist, however, does not feel in the same way. Instead, they watch closely, analyzing what keeps them in control. Manipulation is not just a tactic, it is their default approach to life. Every word, gesture, and interaction is calculated. They test boundaries early, usually in subtle ways. They push slightly, then withdraw, all while observing reaction. They notice what makes someone feel valued, what makes them feel insecure, and then use that knowledge as leverage. The danger is often not in overt cruelty, but in charm. The most manipulative narcissists appear caring, mirroring values, listening just enough to seem genuine. Yet beneath that surface lies one consistent motive: control. They use guilt, flattery, silence, or anger to keep power. They build cycles of lifting someone up just high enough to ensure the fall hurts more. The goal is attachment, drawing others in, making them question their instincts, and trapping them in doubt. The longer the cycle continues, the more disoriented the empath becomes. They begin to second-guess what they saw, heard, or felt. They blame themselves for the narcissist's action. They work harder to earn love, unaware that love was never truly being offered. It was bait. The turning point for an empath is awareness. Once they become aware, fully aware, the dynamic changes. Empaths do not manipulate or seek control, but they notice patterns. They see recurring cycles. They recognize shifts in energy. They begin to name the tactics: gaslighting, love bombing, devaluation. They learn to identify projection, triangulation, and how emotional manipulation hides behind the appearance of care or affection. Awareness becomes their strength, and with it, they reclaim power. The empath begins connecting the dots between the narcissist's words and actions, and the picture that emerges is not love, it is control. This realization does not happen all at once. It arrives in waves, a gut instinct here, a moment of clarity there. With each wave, the empath regains strength. They start trusting their own judgment again. They shift from reacting to observing. They stop absorbing and begin analyzing. What once felt confusing now becomes predictable. The narcissist's tactics lose effectiveness because the empath is no longer operating from confusion, but from clarity. In that clarity, they reclaim what was taken: their voice, their boundaries, and their sense of self. A super empath does not fight back in the way most would expect. They do not shout, throw things, or attempt to wound the narcissist in return. That is not their nature. Their strength lies not in chaos, but in stepping outside of it entirely. At first, they may still get pulled into the storm, trying to reason, explain, or appeal to a sense of fairness. They may hope that if they communicate clearly enough, everything will make sense. But in time, they recognize the truth. The super empath understands that the narcissist does not want clarity, they want control. They thrive on confusion, on strong reactions, especially emotional ones. That is what feeds their ego. So the super empath makes a quiet shift. Internally, they stop trying to fix, to prove, or to convince. Instead, they begin observing close. They start to recognize the patterns: stories twisted, double standards enforced, victimhood played, and affection used as a weapon. They notice how apologies are calculated, how compliments come with hidden hooks, and how vulnerability is quickly followed by manipulation. Once seen, these patterns cannot be unseen. Next comes detachment, not coldness or indifference, but firm, emotional boundaries. The super empath withdraws their energy. They stop justifying themselves, stop defending against distortions, and stop giving emotional reaction. This unsettles the narcissist, because control only works when the other person is emotionally engaged. When the empath detaches, it is like cutting off the narcissist's power supply. The drama no longer traps them, the guilt no longer takes hold, and the silent treatment no longer has impact. Finally comes the most powerful step: setting firm boundaries and dismantling illusions. The super empath no longer views the narcissist as powerful or as someone needing to be rescued. They see the reality: a manipulator behind a mask. The illusion of love, of connection, of safety, all of it collapses, and once the illusion is broken, it cannot be restored. The narcissist is left exposed and powerless, not because the empath fought harder, but because they refused to keep participating in a game designed to diminish them. The super empath rises, not with revenge, but with steady awareness that dismantles every falsehood. A narcissist cannot tolerate what they cannot control. For them, control is not optional, it is central to their identity. Entire relationships are built around it, whether through charm, guilt, intimidation, or subtle manipulation. The objective is always the same: to shape how others think, feel, and respond. They study behavior, not to understand, but to dominate. They notice how someone reacts to praise, how they handle criticism, what provokes anxiety, and what makes them stay. Once they understand these patterns, they use them like tools. As long as the other person keeps responding predictably, with tears, anger, or pleas, they maintain power. But everything shifts when the empath changes their rhythm, when the one who used to over-explain falls silent, when the person who once sought reassurance no longer asks, when endless chances are replaced with firm boundaries. The narcissist loses their grip because the pattern breaks. Emotional responses vanish, leaving unpredictability, and to a narcissist, unpredictability feels like chaos they cannot manage. The empath begins to act in ways that make no sense to the manipulator. They smile without seeking approval. They walk away from conversations designed to provoke. They focus on their own well-being instead of regulating someone else's moods. The narcissist tries to trigger the old reactions, but the system has changed. It no longer runs on the same code. This shift is not about being erratic. It is about reclaiming autonomy. The empath no longer acts from fear, guilt, or obligation. They act from clarity, stability, and self-respect. The narcissist cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs their approval, nor can they provoke someone who no longer needs validation. They cannot control someone who has chosen freedom over familiarity. That freedom, the ability to respond from strength, rather than reaction, is what unsettles the narcissist most. Once the empath stops following the script, the narcissist is left only with the echo of their own strategies, and the realization that their influence has ended. And then comes the defining shift. The super empath, who once felt everything, and carried everything, finally says no, not with anger or threats, but with calm certainty, that no is not just a word, it is a boundary, a declaration, and a turning point. I see clearly, and I will no longer participate. A single boundary, even if small, is enough to shake a narcissist's entire foundation. For the first time, they are no longer in control of the narrative, and because they do not know how to relate without control, their strategies begin to fail. The scripts collapse, the charm no longer works, the intimidation falls flat. Everything that once provided leverage suddenly has no effect. The super empath is no longer reacting, they are choosing, protecting, and reclaiming the space that was once consumed by chaos, making it their own again. Silence becomes a powerful tool in this shift, not silence born of fear or defeat, but deliberate silence that follows awareness. In the past, silence was the narcissist's tactic. They used it to punish, to control, to trigger anxiety. Knowing the empath struggled with emotional distance, they wielded absence like a leash. But when the roles reverse, silence is no longer a tactic, it is a boundary, clarity in practice. It reflects the recognition that not every battle deserves engagement, and not every distortion requires correction. In this silence, manipulation loses oxygen. Without reaction, there is no fuel. Narcissists thrive on attention, including negative attention. They seek conflict, emotional turmoil, and the reassurance that the empath will always chase, explain, or try again. So when nothing is given, no call, no message, no emotional display, their sense of control slips away. Alongside silence comes indifference. If silence removes fuel, indifference removes significance. Indifference has more impact than anger ever could. Anger shows emotional investment, but indifference communicates detachment. It signals that the narcissist no longer holds importance. For someone who needs to feel central, whether through admiration or conflict, that realization is deeply destabilizing. The empath, who once cried, overthought, and overextended, no longer reacts at all. They no longer seek validation, nor do they care to offer resistance. That shift is devastating for the narcissist, because their identity depends on external control. Indifference makes clear that their influence over thoughts, emotions, and energy has ended. Silence and indifference are not passive, they are active demonstrations of strength. They represent the final stage of detachment, where the empath no longer feels compelled to prove, to change, or to revisit the past. They have stepped out of the cycle entirely, leaving the narcissist attempting to play a game with someone who has already walked away. Healing is the ultimate form of strength, and it is the one outcome a narcissist never anticipates. They expect you to remain broken, to continue needing them, to stay trapped in the pain and self-doubt they created. Their control depends on damage. They rely on the chaos they generate to keep others emotionally tied to them. As long as you remain hurt, you remain reactive, and as long as you are reactive, they still hold power. Even if they discard you, they count on your thoughts circling back to them, replaying conversations, questioning what went wrong. That is how they maintain influence, through the echo of old wounds. But healing dismantles that illusion. Healing means the wounds no longer bleed. It means you no longer wait for an apology that will never come. It means you stop longing for a version of them that never truly existed. When you heal, closure comes from within. You reclaim your story, not as a victim, but as someone who endured hardship and emerged stronger, clearer, and more alive. A healed empath disarms a narcissist completely. The reactions that once fueled control disappear. Guilt trips no longer work. Gaslighting falls flat. Emotional hooks dissolve. What remains is awareness. Awareness not only of patterns, but of self. Healing allows the empath to see their own value and to recognize their worth. They no longer accept blame for dysfunction that was never theirs to carry. This is the true end of the narcissist's influence, because influence requires access, emotional, mental, and physical. Healing closes those doors. It replaces turmoil with peace, doubt with trust in oneself. A narcissist cannot function in that environment.
Without chaos to exploit, or confusion to manipulate, their grip is gone. Healing doesn't just weaken their power, it removes their significance. They shift from being the center of your emotional world to being a lesson already learned, a chapter without control over your present or future. A super empath transforms pain into purpose, and that transformation is the one thing a narcissist cannot bear, because narcissists seek more than temporary harm. They want lasting impact. They want the damage they cause to shape your identity, to ensure your story always circles back to them, even in suffering. They want you to remain broken, defined by their chaos. But the super empath takes a different path. They do not just survive trauma, they study it, feel it fully, allow it to burn, and then rebuild from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and unshaken. The empath stops asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and instead begins asking, "What can I create from this?" That shift unsettles the narcissist, because it means the pain is no longer theirs to control. The narrative slips away. What was meant to be a weapon becomes the foundation for growth. Purpose transforms the wound into strength. Purpose brings direction. It is what happens when the empath uses every experience as fuel to set boundaries, to uplift others, to teach, to speak, and to live with clarity. Their pain becomes energy, and that energy creates momentum. They evolve into the version of themselves the narcissist tried to suppress. Confident, clear, unapologetic. In that transformation, the narcissist is forced to confront the outcome they worked to prevent: irrelevance. The empath does not simply move on, they become an example for others, a reflection of truth that reveals manipulation without argument. They enter spaces no longer burdened by shame, but strengthened by wisdom. This growth highlights everything the narcissist lacks: depth, responsibility, and genuine self-awareness. They watch as the empath becomes what they can never be: authentic and powerful from within. That transformation is painful for the narcissist, not because harm was returned, but because the empath refuses to remain diminished, refuses to remain broken, and refuses to let pain be the final chapter. The narcissist loses twice: first, when their control disappears, and again when they realize they fueled the very awakening that ended their influence. For the super empath, revenge is unnecessary. There is no need to shout, to prove, or to retaliate. The path is simple: heal, reclaim your voice, and walk away with your power intact. That is how the cycle ends, and that is what leaves the narcissist with nothing.